Welcome into the GigEm247 Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Hattersley, joined by Brian Perroni. It is the last day of February, which means the dead period will be lifted at midnight on Tuesday night and kicks off a busy stretch of recruiting.
Mhm.
With that, we decided to take some questions from subscribers and got a lot of good ones about the 2024 class, who A&M is kind of sits in a good spot for, some portal questions. So we're gonna dive into those. Brian, how's everything been going?
Oh, good. I mean, we've had a pretty light month with recruiting in
Mhm.
February because the dead period went into effect before signing day. So that was back in January that it went into effect. So the entire month of February was dead. But now, I mean, we're going to see a ton of kids make it to A&M and all over the country. I mean, you've got a list coming out with just the kids, expected this weekend, at A&M is going to be absolutely loaded with there's a pylon 7-on-7 tournament in Houston. But you've got other kids that are not part of that. And they're just, coming in as a lot of people want to see it in person.
No, yeah, no doubt. And I think one of the notable names, Jaden Perlow, a Buford, Georgia, five-star linebacker in the 2025 class, committed to Georgia. Probably one of the headliners of the group. David Stone, good news to get him on campus. One of the top defensive linemen in the country in the 2024
Yeah.
class, Oklahoma and Michigan State, kind of battling there. And he's kicking off a busy spring. And so be sure to check out that list. And we'll be updating the entire month of March and April with the spring game as well. The list is just going to continue to grow. We're going to dive into some of these questions. And I think a good one to start with, as we kind of got to talk to a lot of these guys in the 2024 class, is what's been the message from Jimbo Fisher to recruits this cycle as A&M looks to kind of rebound from the 5-7 uh, last season. And I think one of the big things, and you know, from what feel free to chime in as well from what you've kind of heard. I mean, the injury point has really been hammered home. What a lot of kids I talk to talk about, hey, this team was really banged up last year, had a ton of injuries, but returns a lot of guys, and they really feel like that A&M is going to be able to rebound with guys like Evan Stewart, Moose Muhammad, Connor Wigman, and so that's really been the message. There hasn't been a lot about we haven't heard about all the off field stuff. I think A&M's steered away from that and really talked about the number of injuries that A&M had and the number of guys that they had to play that were young that got valuable experience that are back. I think that's really been the messaging point that A&M's gone with, and still painting a very bright future.
No, for sure. I mean, so the last two classes, they've been able to, well, not the one that just signed, but the classes before that, they pointed to a top four or top five finish. I guess they finished number four. Hey, the future's bright. And then they pointed to, hey, a top five preseason ranking. So they don't have, either of those coming this year. They're not coming off a record breaking class. But like you said, I mean, you really look to see what players are talking about. They may not necessarily say, A&M's hammering this point home, but when there's a common thread, and like you said, they've all mentioned the injuries. Like every kid you talk to has mentioned the injuries, and they've mentioned the youth. I mean, the offense especially. Evan Stewart is a guy that, I mean, even without his football abilities, I mean, he's a social media guy that everybody knows anyway. So, he's a guy that people are drawn to, and they know he's good. They're gonna, they're looking forward to seeing him play and be a veteran on the team. So yeah, they're really selling that. And then obviously, the new offensive coordinator, Bobby Petrino. Hey, this guy was a head coach in the SEC. This guy won, a lot of games. His offense. So there's a lot of stuff to point to. Now they have to back it up on the field. If they don't back it up on the field, then after the recent struggles, it's not gonna resonate at all, and the class is not going to be highly ranked. But they've positioned themselves really well with a lot of guys.
Yeah, I was kind of talking about this with somebody in the past couple of weeks. You kind of get that one get out of jail free injury card that
Yeah.
you get to use, and A&M's kind of using theirs this spring on that. And then you need to see you need to see a bounce back this fall. Otherwise, it'll definitely have more significant results. But for right now, that's really what A&M's been painting. Speaking of that 2024 class, another question, and A&M's got a couple commits already in the class. Dylan Evans, Ashton Funk, Anthony Maddox is the most recent one, and DeBron Gatling. Who is the Bobby Taylor? Bobby Taylor is going to go down as one of the more legendary recruiting guys for the work that he did in that 2022 cycle. Who is the Bobby Taylor of this group that is almost working to the level of the staff, or maybe even beyond on a time spent basis? It's still early in the class. I think the guy though that I would say is working really, really hard, Ron Gatling. I was talking with Aaron Noland last week, and he mentioned, man, DeBron Gatling is in my text messages every single day, bothering me about Texas A&M, kind of with a laugh. They've been friends since middle school, so by no means annoying him, but just joking with him that he can come be his receiver, come be his quarterback. And so, DeBron Gatling's really a guy, I think that, he talked about it. It seems like DeBron Gatling's already at A&M was the way he kind of said it. And I think AJ Maddox with a lot of those Mississippi guys, I think a lot of those Mississippi guys will make it down to A&M at some point this spring. And I would think, I would expect AJ Maddox to really be the guy that kind of spearheads that movement. Those are the two guys. I think Ashton Funk and Dylan Evans are a bit on the more quiet side, which is okay. Every guy's a little different, but I think AJ Maddox and DeBron Gatling are kind of the two that I would see right now.
Yeah, I think A&M fans got a little spoiled with Bobby Taylor. I mean, one, he's just a different kid altogether with how outgoing he is, and working to do that. But also, it was sort of the perfect storm. I mean, the Houston area was absolutely loaded in that class, and I mean, he knew all those guys already. So, I mean, that really helped. I mean, you got a guy, Ashton Funk. Even when he committed, he's like, I'm gotten to be really close with Mekhi Sina and Daniel Cruz and some of the other offensive linemen. I'm going to be recruiting them. So he's working on guys. It's sort of like Colton Thomason last year. Those offensive linemen are a bit under the radar. Nobody sees them. As a class leader. They're not in the headlines of the newspaper. You don't. It's not like if, let's say, Terry Bussey was aboard and he's like, hey, I'm Mr. Texas football or whatever it was for Dave Campbell's. Offensive line is a little tougher. I mean, Ashton Funk was first team All State, but still, it's not. It's not flashy, but yeah, all of them, are definitely working on guys. There is no Bobby Taylor, but if you do get, I'm trying to think, really, there just aren't those really, really big personalities in this class. Just trying to think of players that A&M, is really in it for, maybe if they land like a Draylon Miller or something like that, he knows a bunch of guys, but even him, I mean, he's in Southeast Texas, not in the Metroplex or in Houston. So you're not going to see that, but these guys do love A&M. I mean, when Gatling committed, it was, people were like, all right, well, this is his first commitment kind of deal, like a Zach Evans kind of deal. You don't know where he'll end up eventually, but I mean, he's been to A&M a lot. And like you said, I mean, he's all over there.
Multiple times.
So, I mean, these guys are bought in. So, Dalen Evans is, he did go to TCU a couple weeks ago after, but he had been at A&M 2 weeks in a row. But, even him with all these other schools offering, I mean, he's talking up A&M. So, I think that they've got those little tools. But, you don't have that central ringleader, recruiting coordinator like Bobby Taylor. Fans, you're probably not going to see that again. That was a one-time thing.
I mean, you're not going to see. You just don't see a kid like that puts in, as much time. I mean, I remember when we spoke to him kind of in June at the camps, and he had just popped up for a day at the camps. He said, I'm going to be back here double-digit times in June. And you know what? He actually might well have been. Like, he actually might well have been there double-digit times. And so, I mean, he was just on a legendary level. And, just sticking with the 2024 class, I'll let you lead this one off, Brian. Kind of just I don't know, the question had some desperation or pleading to it, but just who does A&M lead for, or who are they in a good spot for? And it's still early, but I'll let you lead off with this one.
Yeah. So I'll mention a few guys. I know you have a few guys to mention too. Okay. Yeah. And when you say lead, there are some guys that A&M is like definitely the leader for, but others, I'll mention a couple others that, it may not be, they're not like on the verge of committing to A&M, but, I wrote up the individual position previews. There were 8 of them or whatever, the big boards, looking at A&M's board, and all of them had some pretty highly ranked guys that, could be considered that I could see in the class. Like this class has a chance to be good, but actual like leans. I think you'll talk more about him, but Zeno Mazzolo from uh, from Allen,
From Allen,
top
yeah.
100 edge rusher. Some offensive linemen, Bennett Warren, Fortman, Christian. I've got a crystal ball in for him. He's absolutely blowing up, but I think he could end up at A&M. Ori Williams, another offensive lineman, Ruben Owen's cousin. He recently visited last month. I think he's lean. One more offensive lineman, Kai Sina. And then I'm going to, actually two more because you got that Terry Bussey. I think Terry Bussey is going to be in this class, and we talked about Mr. Texas high school football. A&M loves him as a cornerback. They've been out to see him. We'll talk later about Jimbo Fisher's been out to see him. They absolutely love him, and I think he likes that small town feel of A&M. He likes the staff. He likes Bryant Gross Sarmiento, BGA as he calls him. He liked him even before he got the cornerback job. So that's the big thing. And then this is going to seem weird to say he's an A&M lean. Xavier Atkins. Now Xavier Atkins is a linebacker, moved to Houston.
I agree with you too.
He's an LSU commit at the moment, and I don't want LSU fans to get all mad. Like, oh, you're just saying, A&M's gonna. Yeah. You're saying he's a lean, even though he's on the LSU commitment list. Watch him on social media. I know it's just social media, but nothing he posts really seems like he's committed. He's still talking about, I'm gonna choose a school based on this and based on that. And that dude loves A&M. He's been there, several times already, even since committing to LSU. Now that he's in Houston, I mean, he's even closer to A&M, and I think he's going to end up on the A&M commit list, before all said and done.
I agree with you. On Xavier Atkins. I've had the chance to talk to him as well, and he talked about just the job that. And let's give a quick shout out to Alex Garwig, just an analyst I think that really stepped up in a time of transition. When Tyler St. Tucci was heading off to Duke, I mean, he was a kid that Peyton Pierce mentioned, Xavier Atkins mentioned, Ty Anthony Smith mentioned. A lot of these guys
Maurice Williams as well.
Somebody that I was like, hey, man, he really made us feel at home. DJ Durkin has really done a great job in that recruitment. Jimbo Fisher's done a great job. David Bowen's done a good job with Xavier Atkins. And I'm with you. I mean, he said to me, hey, I'm going to be back at A&M multiple times, and I really love what they're doing there. I also think A&M, and it's an interesting one here, is Jaden Hardy. I think A&M is in a good spot with him. I think Oklahoma and Oregon and Miami are a couple of the schools in the race, but I think he really loves what A&M's doing, and I think they're certainly a school that he's looking extremely closely at. As with a lot of these guys, we can say they lead for them, but it's not a done deal by any means. And Zion Kearney's another guy that I think is a good shot that he ends up in this class. I think Oklahoma's certainly in the mix as well, but there's been a lot of positive buzz about A&M this spring. Now they've got to get him back on campus this March. He didn't go to the junior days in January, but he's been to A&M just a ton of times. And I'm with you on Makai.
He told me he didn't go to the junior day. Well, he told me he didn't go to the junior day. He was playing because he goes, I got the schedule. He's like, I've done that. There's a scavenger. I meet the coach and all that. So he went to Arkansas, but yeah, so it's funny. He was going to go there if it was just hanging out. So he's comfortable there. But yeah, he didn't go to the junior day because he didn't really see a point in that.
No doubt. And he's been there a bunch, and once you start getting into the spring and all those, I think he'll certainly be back later this spring. Zeno Umazelu is a guy that's been to campus a ton, and I know A&M would love to get him in the fold early and kind of have him as one of the building blocks of this class. And I think the comments from Makai Sino were kind of, I don't want to say misinterpreted, but kind of taken the wrong way about Steve Adazio and how their relationship is. But I think A&M's in a good spot for him, and I think he's kind of a he's kind of a reserved kid. He's kind of more quiet. I don't think he wants a coach, blowing up his phone 20 times a day and calling him every single day.
For those who may not have read it, what did he say that Adazio
he kind of said that
Steve Adazio, pretty funny, and it's both their personalities.
Steve Adazio kind of said, I'm not going to recruit you. I'm not going to be blowing up your phone 20 times a day and calling you every single day. I'm going to coach you extremely hard, and if you want that, great. Here's the spot for you. Like here's what I'm going to be able to do for you. I'm going to coach you really hard. But basically, I'm not going to kiss up to you and play, the recruiting game all the time. I'm just going to coach you, and if that's what you want, like, outstanding. And I think Mekhi Sina is one of those guys we talk about. If you gel with that mindset, like TJ Shanahan loved that mindset. Chase
Yeah.
Pasantis loved that mindset. If you love that mindset, like, Steve Adazio is going to click with you. And I think that's the case with Mekhi Sina. I think he kind of loves the way Steve Adazio kind of approaches things. And so, he's going to get back to A&M as well. And I could see a very good chance he ends up in the class as well.
Yeah,
So
and I
those,
mean Adazio, his son Louis going
yeah,
to do those things. I don't want the A&M
yeah,
fans to
Louis is
think
going
that
to do
Adazio
those
is just
things. Yeah.
not calling kids, because Louis will, Luce will,
Robert
the other,
Loosewell.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then Grayson Reed as well. All three of those guys are offensive line analysts, and all three
Yeah.
are definitely heavily involved in recruiting. So,
Yeah.
Adazio's old school. He doesn't want to, kiss up, like you said, that he's not going to text guys, every single day. Somebody will. They're in charge of that. I mean, they're on the ball there, so I don't want fans to
Yeah.
think they're just like not even like in communication with offensive linemen.
And you know what? It's kind of an offensive lineman thing too, because I was talking with other, team site reporters as well, and they're like, "Yeah, so-and-so's recruit offensive line coach is the same way. They don't do it either." And so I think it's kind of an offensive line thing as well that, it's they want guys that have a certain mindset, and they're the guys that aren't necessarily into the playing the game and playing the schmoozing game like maybe
Yeah.
you would at receiver or a DB.
Oh yeah, I mean
Some of
those
those,
prima donnas, you got to keep
but
them. You got to keep
you
them
got to
happy.
keep them happy with with
Yeah.
offensive linemen, like we talked about. They're just kind of quiet. They're not going to get all the headlines. They're just going to do kind of the work that maybe isn't the sexiest. And so, I think A&M certainly I think this could end up being a really strong offensive line class that A&M kind of ends up with at the end of the cycle. Speaking of the offensive line, and linebacker, got a question on will A&M, what are the chances A&M brings in a linebacker or an offensive tackle when the portal opens back up? So starting with offensive line, I think the chances are probably low to zero, unless
Yeah.
something crazy happens. A&M has not shown any interest in offensive linemen in the portal to this point. Whether you agree with that strategy or
Yeah.
disagree, that's up to you. But to this point, A&M really hasn't targeted any offensive linemen, reached out to any offensive linemen in the portal because they have Ruben Fothery and they have Trey Zune coming back.
Mhm.
And I think they have some guys behind them that they feel like can play if they need them to kind of step in. Could Cam Dewberry play tackle if they need him to? I think they certainly feel like they could put him there and he'd be fine. And so I think there's guys that they feel like can play tackle. And what do you think about linebacker? Because that's one that they've kind of targeted some guys, but haven't been able to land one yet.
Yeah, like you said, I don't see offensive line happening. I mean, they've told recruits, they've told the players. I mean, they're not recruiting offensive linemen. So unless something crazy, linebacker, they obviously did want one. They thought, I can't even remember his name now, from Oklahoma State, Mason.
Mason Cobb, yeah.
Mason Cobb, yeah. They were in a good spot for him. He went to USC. They really do want a linebacker. So if there are, I don't think they're just going to take a body to take a body, but if there's somebody talented that's in the portal still or that enters the portal, for the first time after spring ball, I could see that. Because, I mean, you are going to, Torian York and Damian Sanford are already enrolled. Chance Johnson will enroll late, but you've already got those guys enrolled. But other than them, I mean, it's just three guys: Chris Russell, Major Cooper, and Martrell Harris. And Chris Russell, this is his last year. Although I guess that the transfer would be for this upcoming year. But I think you want more than five or even six scholarship linebackers. They want you need something. We saw this past year. Depth is key. So I think if I had to bet, I think they'll find a way to add a linebacker. I don't think it's a guarantee that it'll happen. I think they want one, and maybe they will take a body at this point. If you get down to just nobody left, maybe you do just take a body to have a body. I mean, Aiden Ciano from Rice, yeah, he's a walk on, but I mean, even that helps, for practice,
Yeah,
if nothing
he's
else.
got
But
experience and
yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's played on the big stage. So yeah, it's at Rice, but I mean, he's played at an FBS level, so that helps too. I don't think he's going to be a guy in the rotation, but if there are injuries, you can at least throw them in there at times. So, but yeah, depth is just such a concern there. I think it seems hard to see them not taking somebody.
No doubt. And it goes back to the point. I mean, Carter and I talked about this at length last week. What if, and heaven forbid, Edrin Cooper gets nicked up in the fall. Now suddenly, like, you're talking about the guy that you were banking on. You're in a really bad spot at the linebacker spot from the depth standpoint. So I really think, you're one injury away from really being in trouble there. And so I think they really do need to add a linebacker. And I think if there is the right guy there, I think there's certainly going to be, if anything, there's certainly going to be, and this goes to the question about, what are they going to do with the 7 to 10 spots remaining? I don't think Jimbo Fisher has ever said like they were going to sign 80, they were going to have, and we've talked about this before on the podcast, but I don't think he's never said they have to have 85 guys on the roster. He said they're going to have the number of guys they feel like they need to compete for a national championship. And maybe they save spots to sign.
That's such coach speak, though. You don't think he wants 85 guys? Like, come on. I
absolutely, not, but are they going to sign 10 guys in the portal probably in May? Probably not. Like, they're not going to do that. There'll probably be, there'll be maybe a couple additions after the spring, but I don't think they're necessarily going to sign, a whole boatload of portal guys if that's what folks are kind of expecting. I think it more leans towards they're going to be picky. They're going to add maybe a guy here, a guy there that they feel like they might need to shore up depth wise, but I don't think there's like this, need to have, like they feel like they have to absolutely get to 85. I just don't think that's the way they're really approaching it. That fans obviously look at it from that perspective, but I don't think that's necessarily the way the staff looks at it. So we're
going to get to see some walk-on videos, when they award them with scholarships. It'll just be for a year, but I think we might see a few of those this year.
I think we might see a few.
Fisher. Yeah, Jimbo Fisher hasn't done that, so.
Yeah, like, could you see Randy Bond get a scholarship?
Oh, I mean, shoot. I mean, he's a starter. I would think he's on. Yeah,
he's one. Yeah, so he's probably one. Like, that's a candidate to fill one of the scholarship spots. And so I think you'll see them, I just don't think if folks are looking for them to add like a bunch of guys in the portal after spring, I just don't think that's necessarily what's going to happen. So we're going to take a quick break and we got plenty more to get to after a break. We're going to talk a little more recruiting, talk a little out of state recruiting, and talk a little more about the staff's strategy. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. Welcome back into the GigEm247 Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Hattersley, joined by Brian Perroni. Brian, good one to start off with, I think, is just looking at the obviously it's been about a couple months now since the staff is kind of diving into the 2024 cycle. Have you noticed any big differences or any shifts that you've kind of seen in approach so far?
No, I don't think so a ton. I mean, there was a time when there was, there weren't position coaches to recruit some of the players. But I mean, this may sort of roll into one of the other questions, but, I'd seen, I think they are. Somebody asked if they were focusing too much out of state, but I think the in-state guys have really been a focus. I mean, you look at offensive line, this is a really good offensive line class. And we've mentioned guys on the board like, hey, this could be somebody to watch. They've offered pretty much every guy, we've said, hey, that could be one to watch, Bennett Warren, Weston Davis from Beaumont, guys like that, even at one point we're talking about, Casey Poe from Lindale, hey, these are guys to watch. And they've, been doing that and they've offered them and they're after them hard. That record-setting class was a bit different because, they had 31 or 32 guys and they were able to go out of state but also land in state. But I think most of the classes are going to look like the one that just signed, which was mostly in state. And, I think that's the bread and butter. And then if you have the ties out of state, if Elijah Robinson knows a guy, or if Dazio can go up to his old stomping grounds and land a kid from up there from the East Coast, yeah, you do that. But so I've seen more of that, and I think we've seen more of the analysts getting involved now. They're going to start being allowed on the road more often, but we've seen them getting involved more, and I think A&M just using sort of all the resources that they have, and so that's been some of the changes. They got out and they saw a lot of these juniors, because they had the class wrapped up in so in January they were able to see a lot of juniors. So I think they have a bit of a head start, and you're seeing that on the commitment list as well. I mean, this time last year, A&M, they had Colton Thomason. I think that probably was it,
Yeah.
commitments, and there's 4 this year. So, I think they're a little ahead.
No doubt. And I think there's also been an emphasis, at least what I've noticed from Jimbo on Jimbo Fisher's front. He got out and saw a lot of those in-state kids in January. You talk about, he was at Micah Hudson's basketball game. Selma Bridges plays on that team too, and mentioned it was fun to have Jimbo Fisher out there and be able to show a different side. He's been out to see Terry Bussey. He's been out by Timpson. Nigel Smith, basically right after he wrapped up his visit, A&M was over at Melissa the next day. Same thing goes for Lovejoy. When Peyton Pierce made it down, he mentioned Jimbo Fisher was right back there, the next day at Lovejoy to come see them. And they can't have like a ton of contact off campus, but just the fact that they're coming out to the high school and forward facing. He's been by Waco Connolly to see Kobe Black. That's one of the big things I think in January is, even with all these staff changes, I felt like Jimbo Fisher got out and was, in front of a lot of these coaching staffs, and was at a lot of the key in-state targets, high schools. And that maybe was the one difference. I know he gets out to a lot of high schools in January, and kind of one of his opportunities to get out on the road. But I did feel like he got to a lot more of the key targets this year. And, it kind of leads into another question as well about if there's going to be any major on-field or recruiting staff changes. I think, we'll answer that more on the board, but I think right now you're into basically the staff that you got, and you're rolling forward with the group. I don't think there'll be many other changes. And as for out of state,
spring ball starts in less than a month. So yeah, I saw LSU just added a linebacker coach today, but most schools have been done a little while. There are guys jumping into the NFL, but most schools have been done a while, and you want that. There needs to be some coaching and some continuity there. So yeah, I think what you see now is what is basically the product for this next season.
No doubt. And I think on the out of state kids and somebody asked, well, who recruits the West Coast? I think it's largely position based for that. I don't think there's necessarily a guy on this staff that has West Coast ties, but I do think, in today being, with technology today, you can call up a kid and get him on the phone, get a coach on the phone and be able to start building that relationship. And so, Jimbo Fisher has some ties out there to some trainers out there from his time recruiting. And so, I think if it's position specific, it's basically done that way. I don't think there's necessarily a guy whose area is the West Coast. You've got, ties to the East Coast and some of those, but Damian Craig's got obviously Alabama, but with the West Coast, I think it's really position specific.
Yeah, Coley went out there a couple of times last year and did look at plenty of schools, that weren't just his position, which was receiver at the time. He's been a bunch of positions now, but and then Tommy Robinson went out there to look at, Roderick Robinson and San Diego Lincoln. But yeah, like you said, it's pretty much just positional. A&M's just not going to recruit the West Coast as heavily because they don't have the ties there. Right now you have Elijah Robinson ties on the East Coast, you have Adazio ties on the East Coast, you got Coley with Florida, you got Branco Sarmiento with Florida. So, that's where they know people, that's where the connections. Also, there's a ton of talent there. So, if there's a guy that they love on the West Coast, or if there's one that they have ins with, they will. But you don't just it's about relationships, so you can't just, I don't want to say waste time, but, using air quotes with waste time, it's just
Yeah.
it's not going to be as fruitful as sending your guys to where you've developed it. In Florida, they know at Texas A&M that kids know people that have gone to play at Texas A&M. Same with, up in New Jersey and
Hmm.
Pennsylvania. So you can point to that. With California, you can't really say, hey, they're not looking at, oh, that guy went there and paved the way for California guys. So yeah, you're just not going to see it as much. And I mean, it just makes sense, with the limited resources you have.
No doubt. And, just a good example is, and I'll have a story on him coming later today, is Hype Grand. Best name ever, by the way. He just got an offer. Bobby Petrino just called him up and they got him on the phone, extended the offer. Now he's looking to potentially make a visit to campus sometime this spring. And his family says, hey, Bobby Petrino is a guy that coached Lamar Jackson, knows quarterbacks. That's how that relationship kind of starts. And from there they're off and running. And so it's really on that front. It's more, just getting them on the phone and being able to kind of build that relationship. And sticking with the spring, we're probably about a month and a half away from the spring game, kind of coming around mid-April. Got a question: how does the spring game recruiting look? I think you're going to see A&M have a strong group in town.
Oh yeah.
Kelvion Riggins told me that he's one that is making plans to be there for the spring game. But I think, A&M's traditionally had pretty strong weekends. Last year they got a couple of commitments out of it with Bravion Rogers and Javon Thomas. And so,
Oh, that's right.
I think it's probably pretty early to start looking at specifically at those guys. I think there's a good chance that AJ Maddox will be back from what I've been
Oh, he
told.
said he's going to be back a whole bunch. So yeah, he
Yeah,
definitely
he's
would
going to
be
be a
there
whole
for the
back
spring
a
game.
whole
Yeah.
bunch. I think they're looking at late March, maybe early April, and then the spring game as well. So I think you could see him back 3 times in the spring. I would bet is at least, I know Andrew Maddox has his younger brother in 2025 D lineman has some other visits he want to take as well. So not guaranteeing he's going to be back on all 3 visits, but I think there's a good chance he's back on at least a couple of those trips. But I think you're going to see A&M put together a pretty strong visitor list for that spring game, and that'll probably become clearer closer to the time.
Yeah, I don't even think even recruits know right now where they're going to be. Right now they've planned basically the first 2 weekends in March, and that's really it. But I mean, A&M every year has had a ton of players at the spring game, and there's no
Mm-hmm.
reason to believe this year won't be any different. Especially, I mean, Houston kids, it's right there. You drive up, it's afternoon. Dallas, same thing, and you'll have plenty of national guys too. I mean, that's their MO is get. One thing A&M has never struggled to do is get guys on campus. I mean, you go through the national top 100 each of the last couple years, and it's like they've had 40% of the guys. Sometimes close to half of the guys at least on campus at some point in their recruitment. So they've never struggled with that. So I don't see it being an issue this year either.
Heck, just look at last year for all for all the talk about, like, summer struggles and everything they kind of went through. They had Zachariah Branch and Malachi Nelson on campus, 2 of the top players in the 2023
Oh,
class at one point.
who's the
And so,
number 2 prospect this year, Andrew? I need
yeah,
to I
who's
need
the
to
number 2
pull my
prospect.
Nostradamus and predict him randomly showing up.
We're gonna have to, once that 2024 rankings get updated in a couple weeks, we're gonna have to look at who the number 2 prospect is, and they're
Right
gonna,
now, it's KJ Bolden, a safety out of
get.
Georgia. So KJ Bolden will be there. I'm going to guarantee it right now. I'm just going to pull up a name out of my hat.
Well, you joke, but he's a guy that plays on that Domo team that has a lot of guys that are swinging through campus. So you never,
All right,
you
man.
know,
All right, we
you
willed
never
it to
know.
happen again. We got to him to
We,
sign one of them. Who was the number 2 guy? Was it Walter Nolan?
Oh,
That's right,
Walter
2 years
Nolan.
ago.
So
We were like,
it
yeah,
started with Walter Nolan.
yeah,
We kind of joked about Malachi Nelson. That ended
yeah,
up happening. And so, you know what? You heard it here first. KJ Bolden,
yeah. KJ
you
Bolden.
can let us
Heavy
know.
Aggie lean. Don't
Let
just
us,
take this one
yeah,
clip and send it to them. Like these guys are saying you love A&M. You've never
yeah.
been there.
Let you're on the mark for it's the honor that comes with being the number 2 player in the class.
Yes.
Um, and then I think a good one to kind of close out with, and it looks at Kevin Mashik, right? And he's the guy kind of leading this recruiting operation. Um, it's difference in styles and difference in pitches between 2023 and 2024 with Mashik and obviously Marshall Malkow was the guy before. Do you think there's much that you can really glean on message? I think he's more a guy that's in charge of evaluating, making sure everybody's in line, and I don't know that he's necessarily the one that's dictating the message or dictating what's going
Yeah,
on.
he's a little more behind the scenes. I mean, that position is really they do interact with recruits on campus, but it's more managing a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
So, he's behind the scenes, making sure, you know, hey, has somebody talked to this guy lately? Has somebody done this? Have you been out there? Some recruits, do mention him, but yeah, for the most part, it's more of that role. And yeah, obviously the class this year was not as highly ranked as the one year before. So you can say, hey, maybe that approach didn't best, but there were a lot of other factors too. I mean, the struggles on the field, Jimbo Fisher, in the media, is he on the hot seat? Obviously he wasn't. They can't afford to fire him, but it's like,
Yeah.
what's happening with him. I mean, there were a lot of issues that Marshall didn't have to deal with in his time. Um, so yeah, one approach may not necessarily be better, but I do wonder if you'll see him maybe be a little more take a little more step forward and be in the limelight or in the spotlight. I mean, uh, to try and maybe turn things around and do a little better than they did in 23.
No doubt. And I think, when you look at that, he like Daniel Hill was a guy that mentions I talk to Kevin Mashik all the time. Like that's the
Mhm.
guy that I kind of have my main relationship with and and that's a guy that A&M is certainly in the mix for and was amongst his top group of schools. I think for him the big thing's going to be, making sure things go smoothly throughout the summer, the official visit season, late summer. If there was one glaring mistake that stuck out last year, it was kind of that mix up at the end of the summer with official visits and whether you could have them the pool
Oh
party
yeah,
weekend. That was things like that. I think are what you look for this summer that can't happen again. You got to be on the same page about when you bring it in guys for
yeah,
official visits, what you can do, what you can't do. And so, in terms of the message, I think we talked about it before, but it's A&M has from recruits that we've talked to have all kind of mentioned the injury front. And so I think that's been a main message from A&M. A lot of good questions today. A lot of really good ones. If we didn't get to your question, fear not. We're gonna unlock the board and answer the
yeah.
remaining ones that we didn't get to on the board. And so you'll certainly hear from us on there. But again, thanks for joining us on this edition of the GigEm247 Sports Podcast. If you like these shows, be sure to share them and subscribe to the channel to get a notification every time a new video drops. And if you're listening to us on Spotify or iTunes or any other platform, be sure to give us a 5-star review and give us a follow there as well to get a notification every time a new video drops. And otherwise, I hope everybody has a good start to the month and we'll see you guys soon.